Actually, I am going to just go ahead and get started. We're just introing, and if people come in, they come in a few minutes late, and that's great. So I am Kate. I was happy to meet y'all. Thank you for coming. I'm the communication specialist for She's the First. That means I do all of our social media. I work closely with Katie Riley on our campaigns, and especially on our video content. I do a lot of stuff with that. I've been with She's the First for a long time, since we started back in 2009. I made our very first website. And since then, I have been working as a photographer and a videographer on and off in various capacities. And then, I started this job in January doing all of our communications. So it's very exciting to be here to talk to you. The summit is one of my favorite times of year. So it's very exciting. So can you all tell me what chapters you're from? You can say it out loud or in the chat, whichever you prefer.
My name is Leah, and I'm from the UCLA chapter.
Yes, and you're also a Girls Advisory Council member, am I right?
Yes.
Excellent, very exciting. Thank you for being here. Carla, I met the other day. You're TCNJ, right?
Oh, yeah. I'm Carla.
Excellent. All right, let's keep moving. So today we're going to talk about how to ethically storytell, how to make your storytelling about girls' rights, and She's the First personal and authentic, but also think about the ethical implications of how we're telling these stories. So I really care a lot about this. I actually went back to school to study this. I am getting my graduate degree, my master's degree at NYU in digital advocacy and brand communication, and I'm writing my thesis right now about nonprofit videos and how we represent the people that we work for, which are, in my case, girls. So I also want to say that this is a learning space. We're all learning. I'm still a student. So I want y'all to feel free to talk, to ask questions, to ask me to clarify, ask me to slow down. If we're talking about something that you're not that, just let me know. Talk in the chat because it's Zoom. So that's why I wanted to do it on Zoom so that y'all could talk back to me. So today's going to work by, we're going to work through a framework for the story of self, us, and now, which is a personal narrative. It's a way to share how you're connected to a cause and how you'd like other people to also be connected to that cause. And interspersed in there are some tips on how to do that ethically. So we will go to the ethical storytelling slide, please. Perfect. So ethical storytelling aligns your message with your mission. So if we are wanting a world where all girls can choose their own future, we want to make sure that we're talking about that in a way that doesn't belittle them, that brings them up, that champions them. So this week, you've spent time talking about your chapter's values, identifying what you all as a group care about together. Today's framework is more about a personal story. If you were talking to a family member or a friend, what are your personal values that align with She's the First that you could then use to connect with an outside audience that doesn't know anything about She's the First, but how can you bring them together using values that you share? And also by being intentional about ethical storytelling, we can avoid a lot of the common pitfalls, some of which are when we're passionate about a cause, we sometimes talk about the problem in a way that belittles or infantilizes the people we're talking about, especially when we're talking about young people. And so it's really important to be intentional, to use your language carefully, and to not other people, to have you feel like this is us and this is them. Like we're all in this together. We're all working on this cause as a group. And so we want to talk about people as a team. So we will move on to the first slide, which is the next slide, I mean, tip number 1. So before you begin, we all have implicit biases. We all have different privileges, different coming from different backgrounds. We have different experiences. And one way, so a lot of what I'm saying today is based on the worksheet that you received this morning, the storytelling worksheet. And so in that worksheet, there's a link to a Harvard implicit bias test. It's very short. I've done it. There's a bunch of them, but you can do it. It's very quick and it's confidential, but it helps you identify some of your blind spots, things that you might unintentionally be bringing into your life and your relationships. And it's a way to make sure that when you're storytelling, you are avoiding those things. So the next slide. So the public narrative is what we're going to be working on. It's developed by Marshall Gantz, who's a professor at Harvard. And it's an exercise I've done in my classes at NYU, but basically it's a powerful story that you tell to convince other people to care about your cause. You want to motivate people to join you in action. So the structure of it is going to be for your campus campaigns, you've been doing a VPSA, which is values, problem, solution, action. And that's great for a campaign where you're at like speaking as a group to the external world. This today is, again, very personal when you're talking to your friends, your family, your teachers. I like this framework a lot from an ethical perspective because it focuses on you instead of them. Again, it gets you away from that othering idea. And so in order to get you to know me better, I'm going to give you an example right now. So I have been a photojournalist for about 15 years, and I believe that everyone deserves to have their story told with dignity. I started my career in news, and I had several situations that made me decide to change careers. And one of them was I was standing in the office of a newspaper that I worked at, and one of the editors were talking about a little girl who had gone missing. And he said, it would be great for us if she wound up dead. And I just, that's not why I'm in news or storytelling. I believe that news is very important and that job is very important to our democracy. But that just sat wrong with me. So later that month, I quit and I went off to go work for nonprofits to tell stories about people in their communities that are uplifting everyone. But then I found a lot of people were doing something similar there. I had one organization ask me to take pictures of people without their consent, and another asked me to do pictures of people in the very worst situations of their lives, and another asked me to deify their American founder who was building wells all over Africa. And it just didn't feel like it was highlighting the people who were living and experiencing the causes and championing them. So I feel like I want to challenge all of you to think about that and really work towards representing girls around the world with dignity and ways that they are proud to be part of it. I would like you all to think about trying to make sure that if she was standing next to you, that she would be excited that you were telling this story about her. So that's an example of a public narrative. I started with a personal story and I moved to an us, and then I moved to a now. So go to the next slide. So like I said, so you heard my example of story of self. It's a personal story, why I decided to go into ethical communications. Story of us, we are working together to tell these stories for girls around the world, for the rights. And then story of now is the action steps that I want you to take. And I asked you to consider how you're telling the stories. So are all of you still with me? Do you have any questions? Should we keep going? You feel good? Awesome. Okay. So we will go to the next slide. All right. So I'm going to give y'all 2 minutes to think about who your audience is. And I know that if you're doing the daily challenges, you did this again for your campaign with your campus chapter, but this is for you to think about, again, your personal connections. It's really specific. So I was talking to you in this room, but you could be talking to your suite mates, your teammates, your classmates, your teachers, your family, and each person you might cater what you're saying differently. So I'm going to give you 60 seconds to think about it, setting a timer right now. Just list them all out, anyone you can think of that you would want to possibly talk to about. She's the first. All right. Does anybody want to share some of their audiences that they thought of? You don't have to.
My mind went to my university. So I was thinking the main audience are my student peers, maybe professors, also my family and friends. And then I also thought maybe just people because I live in LA, or maybe I specifically live in Westwood in LA, the Westwood area, because maybe my club is doing like a tabling event and we come across some people who aren't affiliated with my university, but who live in the area.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually live in a college town, and so I'm a townie in my college town. So yeah, if I ran across a student club, I would definitely be a potential audience. So that's a great idea. I love it. All right, so we will move on to the next slide. All right, so we start with our story of self. Want to think about personal experiences that have led you to advocacy. Why do you want other people to join you in advocating for girls' rights? And what are your personal values that align with She's the First? So it's like if you're into fantasy or sci-fi, if you know The Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen, it's her beginning when she volunteers as tribute. And that's like her values of sisterhood and loyalty and caring are the values that she's leading with there. And then when you think about the story I told you, that's about like the time when I was in the newsroom and that editor was really callous. That was a turning point for me. So let's go to the next slide, please. And so we want you to lead with why you care about the cause. Leading with values is important because it's both in both storytelling frameworks that we gave you this week, the VPSA and the story of self lesson now. And there are two reasons why it's effective. The first one is that it immediately gives you a potential connection to your audience by saying, like, I believe all girls should be able to choose their own future. That's a value that I think a lot of people can connect with, even if they're like not necessarily into girls' education or rights. Maybe they don't have a daughter, maybe they don't know any girls. But that idea that every girl should be able to choose their own future is something that they should be able to connect with. And there are lots of values. I find the Girls' Bill of Rights is a really great place to go to think about something of value to draw on, rights that all girls should be able to experience. And that draws people in to have a shared connection with you. And then the other reason why I like it is because ethically, I feel like by starting with a value instead of diving right into the problem, you're bypassing your audience's potential preconceived notions about the causes of the problem. Sometimes if you dive into, millions of girls are experiencing poverty around the world, people's brains immediately start making up reasons why that is, which might not actually be the real reasons, but then they get distracted with their preconceived notions, their biases, like we talked about before. But if you've connected with them first on a value basis, then you can hook them and then continue to talk about, get to the problem, get to the solution, get to the action. So let's go to the next slide, please. So like in my story, my personal values I listed here: doing good, integrity, align with the values of ethical storytelling and the values that I imagined all of you as campus chapters have. And then I chose them to try to weave into my story of self, us, and now, to tie it all the way through. Let's see. So yeah, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. We're going to go one more slide over, but that'll blank out my examples. And you can think about, and I know a lot of you didn't have time to actually work on your campaigns this week, but if you just think about maybe your personal values of She's the First, or values of your campus chapter, and then choose one audience of those that you identified and list what you think their values are. And then that way you can try to connect it all together. So I'm going to give you all 2 minutes. Let me know if you have questions, and let's go. Okay. Does anybody want to share their values, the ideas they thought of? You don't have to, but if you feel like you would like to, go for it.
I think one of my values is perseverance, I guess. And I feel like that's useful for, the campaign, that values for campaign, because sometimes issues are usually like they die out, like people's concern for them for issues kind of die out soon, but you have to continue trying to fight for the issue over a long period of time, which is not usually the case, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think that's the case for causes and also for like the individual girls that we're talking about, especially during COVID. So many of them really persevered and pushed through and worked with their mentors to keep going to school. A lot of them did a lot of activist projects. So, and all of you have also had to do all that remote school, which was not easy. So I think that perseverance is especially this past year and a half, something a lot of people will connect with immediately. They understand that, they value it, and that's something that will draw them into your story. So I think that's really great.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, we will move on to the next slide, please. All right, so when we're thinking about our stories, we want to make sure if we are talking about someone that's not ourselves, that we describe the activist story in a way that'll spark pride in them. So sometimes as an ally, we talk about people that causes that don't directly affect us. Perhaps something's happened to someone close to us, and that was the catalyst for your activism. Or perhaps you're using a story that she's the first shared about a girl and that you want to use that as a catalyst to get people excited. And they're all great ways to share about your cause, but we want to be really careful when we describe other people and make sure that we're telling the story in a way that if she was standing right next to you, that she would be super proud and excited that you were sharing this story. So we'll get into some of the ways to make sure that that's happening with the next slide, please. We want to challenge stereotypes, which I think everyone here at the She's the First Summit understands that we're all about it. But again, we'll go back to that idea from the beginning. We want to challenge our personal biases. We want to make sure that we're aware of what they are, and so that we can really look back through our work and think about, am I telling the story in a way that reflects maybe a stereotypical idea about a group of people that our society has put on you? So, I am doing a lot of studying about colonialism and imperialism in my work in graduate school, which I also is very relevant to my work as She's the First. And I've recently learned that when imperialist nations were going out into the world and taking over, they were using photography and videography as a way to try to dominate and tell the people back at home that colonized people are lesser. And that's kind of an idea that sometimes still sticks today. A lot of Americans see people from formerly colonized nations as other, and it's something that has been perpetuated for a long time. So we really try to be careful about how we present issues for girls around the world and make sure that we're not leaning into that stereotype. We want to make sure that we all feel like we're on the same team, we're working together to make sure that all girls can experience their rights. So then we will go on to the next slide, please. Thank you, thank you. Okay, story of self. So we thought about who your audience is. We thought about what values you're going to use. And so I'm going to give you, I said 5 minutes here, but I think I am going to run over if I give you 5 minutes. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to think about a turning point moment that you would want to use. And again, at the end of this, you're not going to have it written. You're going to have some ideas about how you would present this story of self us now. So I'm going to give you another 2 minutes. Think about your story of self altogether, the audience, the values, and the catalyzing moment. And we'll be right back. And then feel free to put questions in the chat, shout out your questions. It's all good. All right, I know that was fast. It was not a whole lot of time to think about it, but has everybody feel good about the idea of your story of self? Like you understand the concept of it. Do you have any questions about that? Awesome. All right, so the next slide is the story of us. So this is where you're going to get people to care. Like, okay, you told this personal story, but why should the people you're talking to care about it? So you should go back to your list of values and use it to link your motivating moment to your chosen audience. And one way to do that is, the next slide, please. To frame the story around your vision for the future. So show your audience that change is possible and that it's happening right now, and that activists and the girls we work with are capable of making it happen. In fact, they are making it happen right now. You want to give people hope that change is happening, and that should also help them to want to join the cause. She's the first example is that sometimes we have to talk about the ways in which girls are not experiencing their rights around the world. We have to explain that this is a problem. But I try to always balance that with, but look at what all of these awesome girls are doing. Look at what our campus chapters are doing. Look at what girls during COVID are doing. There's a girl in Uganda that asked for some land at Arlington Academy of Hope and started a garden and then taught other people how to grow vegetables and helped with hunger in her community during COVID. In Guatemala, the girls made PSAs in their local language to teach people about COVID safety. So there's a way to balance that problem with the fact that the solution is already happening. So next slide, please. This one, I'm gonna give you, let's see, what time is it? 60 seconds. I said 3 minutes, 60 seconds, just to think about why should they care? Why is this person you're talking to gonna connect to your personal story and the cause? That was really fast. But I hope that you had a little bit of time to think about it. Again, all of this information, a lot of it is in that worksheet you got today. So I know that I'm throwing a lot at you, but the basics of it are in that worksheet for when you want to go back and really write it out and think about what your public narrative will be. I just want to make sure that we have enough time and we are done by 7. So we are now, if we go to the next slide, please, to the last section, the story of now. So you've told them a personal reason why you care about this cause. You start with the value. You've told them a personal reason why you care about this cause. You've told them why they should care. Why are we in this together? And now you need to tell them what you want them to do about it, and why right now. You can even start it with like a value that you talked about. So do you value our right to freedom of expression? Do you value preserving our planet for our grandchildren? Do you value integrity? Like, you can definitely do that, or you can just dive into what you want them to do. But you need to be really specific. Do you want them to sign a petition? Do you want them to join your campus chapter? Do you want them to donate? Do you want them to show up to an event? I asked you to think ethically about your stories. But you, in this narrative about She's the First, you need to have something specific you want the people you're talking to do. But this can get a little tricky, so we have a few more tips for you. We'll go on to the next slide, please. So we already talked about this a little bit. We want to talk about girls as activists and not victims. We want to tell a story like she's standing right next to us, but we want to be really realistic about what one person can do to solve this problem. So one person's donation is not going to, get every girl in the world in school, but one person's donation might help fund a seed grant, or it might help fund access to a mentor. Something a little more realistic that ties the story you just told to what effect, what impact their participation will have. The problem with when we talk about something in a way that makes it sound like this one donation or this one petition is going to change everything is that it kind of belittles what the problem is, basically. And it sometimes can belittle the girls. So we want to make sure that we're realistic about what we're asking people to do, and also realistic with them about what the impact will be. So we try to have a balanced power dynamic in our communications between the donors and the girls. And the girls are the heroes in their own lives, and donors are really strong advocates for girls' rights. So we'll go on to the next one. And we talked a little bit about this earlier too. We want to talk more about solutions than problems. So this is how you're going to move your cause forward. And I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about problems. Like, we have to explain that, these things are issues. Girls are not getting access to education. Girls are not being able to step up to leadership positions. Whatever your segmentation of girls' rights is that you're talking about, it is a problem and we need to talk about it. But sometimes gets problematic when we're trying to quickly talk to someone and we can't really get into the systemic causes of a lot of these problems. And then again, that kind of leaves space for your audience to insert their own implicit biases about why this problem exists. So if you have time, it's always encouraged to put a reason. COVID-19 caused lots of layoffs, which then caused families to have their girls drop out of school to bring home money for the family, something like that. But when we focus wholly on the problem, we create that ambiguity. So we want to talk about the problem, but most of it is about the solution. Most of it is about what She's the First is doing to address this issue. And by talking about solutions, you're providing a clear value-based view of the future. And again, that brings back to the value that you chose to tie throughout. That's keeping them interested, keeping them tied to it, their personal values, your personal values, and the causes all tied together keeps them interested. And then the next slide, please. And then finally, remember that language matters. We know that words hold a lot of power. That's why we don't say all lives matter when we're specifically talking about Black lives. It's why it's the right thing to do for sports teams to not use Native American words and images as their mascots. So it's very important to be precise and to be respectful in the language that we choose. And so on that worksheet that we gave you a few examples of words that maybe even we used in the past that we now are moving away from. One example is scholarships, sponsorships. We have a big post on social media about why we moved away from that model. And so now we just say we team up with grassroots organizations, we team up with girls, we provide funding to local organizations. And if you want to learn more about that, I can share the link with you to an explainer about that. But yes, in the worksheet, we have some examples. Let's see. And then there's also, oh yeah, it's okay, Carla. Excellent, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then so there's also a lot of causes that overlap with our cause that you could look up their language guides. So for example, GLAAD has a really great language guide, and the Native American Journalists Association. So you can just Google that and they will help you figure out the respectful and proper way to talk about different issues. All right, so last slide. Well, not the last slide, next slide, almost the last slide. So you now have talked about your story of self, your story of us, your story of now. And so it's time to put it all together. So for your story of now, you want to consider your call to action. You want to think about what your vision of the future is. And remember to work your shared values through all 3 sections. And so let's see, what time is it? I'm going to give y'all 2 minutes so that we still have some time for Q&A. But I also am supposed to be at office hours tomorrow night. So if there's anything you have questions about, you can sign up for office hours and we can chat about it there. Or you can chat me in the Slack. I'm on the Slack. So maybe 2 minutes just to kind of plot out the ending, your story of us, your story of now. And we'll be right back to close out